Hello Internet, and welcome to this video where I answer comments from some of my videos. Why am I doing this? Because I haven't actually had a video out for God knows how long, and I just feel really embarrassed about it. Now, it has to do with my regular life and my regular work, and that means that hopefully soon I might actually land another job, which will hopefully make sure I have more time to do videos. I'm also thinking about revamping things a little bit, because half an hour might be a bit too long for videos as it is, and also it takes a long time to do them. Maybe I'll start doing shorter, like 5-10 minute videos, more in tune with what I have time for, and just instead of leaving the big long explanatory ones for well, when I have time for them, honestly. I don't want to say special occasions, but at least to a certain degree, and then focusing perhaps more on interesting and funny history for at least a little while. But let me know below if you have any comments to that. Anyway, what are we doing today? Well, we're reading comments on some of the videos, because despite the fact that my channel, of course, have hardly blown up to be world-spanning or anything, I have actually had a couple of videos where I've had a good number of thousands of views, which is, for a channel with 300 subs who produces completely original content, is actually fairly decent in my opinion. So I'll be reading a few comments, answering a few questions, and giving a bit of salt and snark. And yes, this is my time to be whiny, so this is my channel, so anyway, let's get started. This first comment is from my video about the Battle of Poitiers, which is probably still my biggest video with about 7,000 views, and other people have said the same thing, but I'm just picking this one. It's not because I'm picking on the actual person saying it, but the comment is, of course, utter rubbish. Where was Poitiers? Anywhere near Poitiers? To which I can only say, in the description of this video, I will put 3 Danish place names. I want you all to pronounce them correctly and without anything that makes me laugh about your, inability to speak a foreign language you're not actually capable of speaking and have never learned, and then you can get back to me about my pronunciation of French. Huh. The next one is from my video about the, great and glorious Cherokee tribe, and it's from my friends Chagrin and Barrett. And if you haven't already, you should go check out her channel, because she's awesome and she has some amazing stories. And my comment that I got here was, of course, hee, Daddy was a Muskogee Creek and Mama had some Cherokee. And my answer to that, which is, of course, going to get me killed by Shaggy next time I see her, is, I'm sure she did, Shaggy. I'm sure she did. Wink, wink. Say no more. Hey. Okay, this one is from my video about the Jomsvikings, and this is the first one where I'm actually sort of gonna answer a question or reply to an actual comment, rather than just having a bit of fun and a bit of, whining. So, the comment is, they have not found any fortress in Poland. There is an area in Denmark called Vendsyssel. There have found a great round fort from the Viking Age. Perhaps Saxo mixed Vendsyssel and Vendland. It does not make up any sense having a fort in Poland. The answer is about that they haven't found the famous Jomsborg down in Poland, so he doubts that was where the Jomsvikings were placed. Well, first of all, Saxo would not make that mistake. I mean, he might not have been the most intelligent of fellows, but he was obviously not stupid, and there's no way he would mistake northern Jutland for a part of Poland. Second of all, the fortress would have been made of basically a wood palisade with wooden houses. With the amount of flooding and fire and everything that could go on down there, if they actually had found the ruins of a town no one knew exactly where was, but was somewhere on a island that is, possibly somewhat floodable, it would be incredibly surprising. No, the Jomsborg was somewhere in Pomerania or somewhere in northern Poland, and Saxo didn't just make that mistake, especially since the name of Vendsyssel wasn't actually in use 1,000 years ago, so that probably means that he couldn't have made that mistake. Okay, this next one is from one of my most controversial videos. Of course, I knew it would be controversial when I put it up, but I chose to do it anyway. It's from my top 10 American Civil War generals, and it goes: Burnside, Cronsell, that is me, Ambrose Burnside's incompetent leadership led to the Battle of the Crater. He's not even top 10. Top to bottom, Grant, Sherman, Meade, Sheridan, Hancock. Thomas is 6th, followed by your honorable mentions until 10. Number 10 was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the best civilian general. Okay, this is where I might actually spend some time answering it. I've had many comments on that video, a new one even yesterday. And I'm choosing to answer roasted because it's one of the first ones. And also because I can here answer some questions that most people seem to be mistaken for. In the beginning of the video, I quite categorically states that I'm sticking to generals who held their own independent command. This goes for everyone, not just roasted. This is why I don't have Cleburne for the South. This is why I don't have Hancock for the North. This is why I don't have someone like McPherson even. I agree that all of these were probably better generals than the one I mentioned, but I decidedly chose to stick to those who held independent command because they, to a certain degree, have a higher degree of they have a higher degree of first autonomy to allow people to see what they can do, but also a much higher degree of responsibility. It's easier. That doesn't mean that they were not awesome generals, because they were, and Hancock absolutely should probably have been on this list have I just picked best generals from top to bottom. But Hancock always worked under someone else. He was always responsible for implementing other people's battle strategies, which means that I simply cannot say that he was as good as the people who commanded the armies he was part of, because you don't know how he would have done in the first place. Other people I could have mentioned in those kinds of situations would have been Reynolds, for that matter. It could have been some of Grant's commanders. There were plenty, and again, in the South, there were tons of them. Again, that was primarily simply because I chose that way of ranking the generals. Again, I will do a list of other generals of, corps and division ranks if there is any desire for that. As per Burnside, well, I can only say that I rank Burnside higher than the rest of you. The Battle of the Crater were as much Meade's problem and Grant's problem as anyone's. Burnside had people gone with what Burnside wanted. I think there's a very good chance it could have been a spectacular success. Yes, he made mistakes, and yes, his stuff at Nashville was not good. His stuff at Fredericksburg were catastrophical, but I answer that in the video itself, I feel. This next comment is from the same video, and it goes: Bedford Forrest, good laugh. He was essentially a loose cannon and could not be trusted to take orders from anyone. And this is all true. I absolutely cannot deny that. More than that, he was primarily a raiding general to a far greater degree than, for instance, Jeb Stuart, who, while some discuss whether or not Forrest or Stuart was the best Southern cavalry commander, someone might even put Wade Hampton in there, I chose Forrest because, again, he was an independent general from time to time. And in that role, even if the role was, in my opinion, fairly strategically irrelevant, he was incredibly successful. Now, again, would he have been a better general if he'd gotten along with people, even someone like, for instance, I don't know, Johnston or Hood or someone else? Yes, he probably was. Could he have done more for the Southern cause? Yes, he absolutely could if he had put aside his temper and so on. But this does not detract from his results with the army he had available and the missions he was then given as an independent commander. Someone's skills as a general does not always correspond to their usefulness to the overall cause. And again from the same video, as you can imagine, or see, this was indeed one of my more controversial ones, since there's so many comments on that. But it goes: Grant had one primary talent, which was the skillful, unrelenting use of overwhelming force and resources to grind down the South. Lee and Jackson achieved much more with so much less, so logically the talent scale will tilt to Lee and Jackson. That said, Grant was an excellent commander and had the guts to do what it took to lead his army and win a very tragic and destructive war. It took the South more than a century to recover economically, and some say it hasn't fully done so yet. My comment to that will be only the top part of this, not the south part. I'm not American, and I just don't know enough about American economic policies to either comment or, positively or negatively on that. To say, however, that Grant had one primary talent, which was the skillful and unrelenting use of overwhelming force, probably indicates to me that you haven't studied his career, because if there was one thing that man was very good at actually not using, it was just overwhelming force in hammer blows. If you look at his earlier career out in the West, his real skill was maneuver and tactics and splitting up the enemy so he could fight them piecemeal, and skillful and, in fact, if you can say it like that, intelligent and inventive use of tactics and maneuver and so on to achieve his purposes. Look at the Vicksburg campaign. Hell, look earlier at what would have been the Nashville campaign if he had been given free reins at the time. So I honestly don't believe you can say that. Now, it's true that to a certain degree Lee and Jackson achieved more with less, but you have to remember Lee and Jackson was always on the defense on their own home turf. What Lee did, for instance, during the Overland campaign, where he actually, of course, the first time he faced Grant, was constantly place his army in the most powerful defensive positions available. To say that Grant should have been able to, or that Grant is a less capable general than he, because he couldn't manage to get a very strong, powerful, and effective army out of strong defensive positions with maneuver in the much cramped areas of Northern Virginia, is honestly silly, in my opinion. Again, I am not disparaging Lee or Jackson or anyone. I am just saying that there is a very big difference between running an offensive campaign and a defensive one, and I'd like to point out that every time Lee ran an offensive campaign, he lost badly. So, also, for the whole thing with Grant the Butcher, if you actually look at the numbers, Lee lost more men, percentage-wise from his army than Grant did for his. So I don't think I've ever heard anyone call Lee a butcher for good reasons. And another one from that video. Excellent analysis and assessment criteria of the generals. Yes, if Jackson had survived, there would likely be a Confederacy today. Gettysburg were an unnecessary failure. Yes, I don't know if I would call it unnecessary, perhaps, because I don't think I am one to gainsay Lee when he said he felt he had to fight that particular battle. But as a general rule, I would agree with this. Would a Confederacy have existed today? Again, I'm not American, so I choose not to comment on internal American, economic realities and so on. I am not sure the Confederacy could have survived at anything more than a rump third world state, to be perfectly honest. Its economic system was catastrophic, and its cultural insistence on staying within the sort of knight and squire's South would probably not have lent itself well to further development and surrender. But admittedly, Jackson in the place of, the First Corps at Gettysburg would definitely have changed things really dramatically. And again, the same video. I would never put Grant or Sherman, indeed any Union general, above Jackson, Forrest, or Lee. Well, mate, that is entirely your prerogative. I will say, however, that I also feel it displays a very heavy degree of, shall we say, Confederate bias over some realistic assessment of military ability and historical, well, insight, to be perfectly honest. Whether or not you like them more is your prerogative. If you want to put them higher, that's your prerogative. But just saying it doesn't make it so, and I feel I argued well for why I had the people in the positions I did. And one more from the same video. Are you not just surprised? Interesting. Personally, I think Sherman's maneuvering his army to Atlanta was the most brilliant campaign of the war. Thus, I put him over Grant. He outmaneuvered Johnson at each turn, forcing him to disengage and retreat without battle. Even the taking of Atlanta was brilliant, not the long, arduous siege like Vicksburg. By the way, it was Sherman's idea to cut his supply lines as he went into Georgia. His approach to the Atlanta campaign alone elevates him to among the best generals ever. Grant was excellent but hardly brilliant. I wonder how good Grant would have been without the huge resources of the North. This is difficult because I actually don't agree, disagree with very much he's saying. I just want to add something to each point. I also think that Sherman maneuvering his army to Atlanta was the most brilliant campaign of the war. In fact, I think it was the most brilliant campaign of the 19th century, in competition with probably Wellington's 1813 career, Napoleon's Austerlitz campaign, and von Moltke's surrounding of the French army at Sedan. However, there is a couple of things I need to add to that. First of all, yes, he outmaneuvered Johnson at each turn, but again, that was Johnson, a defensively minded general who wanted to give up space for time, who knew how Lee, for instance, would have reacted to the same situation. You need to always see these sorts of things in, the context of which they happened. Yes, the taking of Atlanta was brilliant and not the long, arduous siege like Vicksburg, but then again, Vicksburg was a fortress city built to be almost impregnable, which was actually why the taking of it was so brilliant, because no one thought they could actually take it. Atlanta was a city on a plain without defenses. So once the army had been put in a situation where it could no longer receive any supplies, the fall of Atlanta was inevitable, which is why Hood didn't even try to contest it. Hood, of all people, just up and left without trying to contest it. So, you can't really say that for absolute certainty. And yes, it was Sherman's idea to cut his supply lines, and Sherman was an amazingly brilliant general. There's no doubt about it. I wonder how good Grant would have been without the huge resources of the North. I say again, check the Vicksburg campaign, which he did without the huge resources of the North. Really, the only resource he had that his southern opponents didn't have at that time was the Navy, and he only utilized that to get below Vicksburg and get across the river, something that could have been done in other ways if necessary. Also, the Vicksburg campaign, of course, disproves the concept of Grant as a butcher who was just throwing people at his opponents until they went away, because he did the Vicksburg campaign exactly in order to try to prevent just throwing people at his opponents until they couldn't take it anymore. So again, this is of course a matter of personal perspective, but my personal perspective, and I'm the one who has this channel, is that Grant was just that little step above Sherman. An opinion Sherman himself, by the way, held as well. Okay, one more from the same video, of course, and then we're done. I picked so many from this video because it was obviously the most, contentious I've ever made, and it's obviously the one that's got the most comments, so that's basically why. Okay, on Lee, I think he's overrated. His actions at Gettysburg, especially Pickett's charge, is inexcusable. The analogous charge of the Light Brigade by the British had some mitigating factors, somewhat excusing the blunder and slaughter. Pickett's charge, however, had no excuse. It was sheer incompetence, and its slaughter was horrific. In the course of great generals in history, I don't think there is one that is considered great or even good that ever displayed such incompetence. P.S. Napoleon's debacle on the invasion of Russia was a mistake of grand strategy, not on field generalship, in my opinion. But of course, his grand blunder resulted in the death of about 500,000 soldiers, almost his entire army. I don't know of any general in history that showed such grand stupidity, so he too is overrated, but then his mistake was in grand strategy, not in the field. My comments to that is, I think one should be very, very, very careful about letting one situation and one mistake color the entire abilities and career of any particular general. Yes, I actually agree with everything you say on Pickett's chart, but again, context matters. Considering the situation he was in, it could well be that Lee, who obviously was not feeling, super good at the time, might just have felt that was a necessity, or there might have been some military intelligence, yes, contradiction in fact, I know, that he was in receipt of that we don't know today. Again, when someone has displayed nothing but tactical brilliance over their career and then make one inexplicable mistake, all I'm saying is be very careful before you attribute it to some overarching degrading of their ability. What you say about Napoleon is completely correct, except I would put in, so to speak, the same kind of comment to that. Be very careful about taking one of the most brilliant generals in history, which he undoubtedly was, and letting one mistake color the entire perspective, though admittedly in Napoleon's case there is no doubt that his skills were deteriorating towards the later part of his career, probably having to do with a general deterioration of, honestly, his personality, if you look at how he was reacting and how he was acting, considering how he was when he was just one of the, older, one of the regular generals. But yeah, again, there's nothing I really disagree with about this, just saying that be very careful about degrading the position of one general for one mistake made. Well, that was it. 10 comments. There are plenty of others I could have made. Admittedly, like I said, most of them were from that particular one video, as you can imagine. Maybe I should do some more controversial stuff going forward to get more comments for these sort of things. On the other hand, I never actually planned to make one of these videos, and I'm only doing it because I want to get some kind of material out there, because I feel embarrassed at not having done anything for so long. But yeah, I don't really have anything to say beyond that. I hope you enjoyed this. If you disagree with them, you know where to leave the comments and stuff. But yeah, until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.